Good afternoon, Rotarians, friends, and guests. My name is Becky Fields, and I am the proud president of the Rotary Club of Tulsa. Let's begin our program today with invocation from Senator Langford, followed by a special performance from the Tulsa Opera, Madam Butterfly.
I'm going to go ahead and sing my prayer operatic just to prepare for that. Let's pray together. Father, thank you. You have given us much. This day, our friendships, our food, our health, time. In Psalm 50, you called on the sacrifices that you want, and you called us to begin with gratitude. So we begin that way today. Help us to live that out, to not become the whiner, complainer, worrier, but to be the people that see you who you are, the powerful one who has all things in control. And so help us to trust you today in our gratitude. Thanks for this dialogue and conversation and for the encouragement we get from each other. In your name I pray, amen.
You all can sit if you want. It's a long aria. I would not stand.
Wow, how beautiful. Thank you, Keely and Aaron. And I don't know if you recognize her, but Keely was one of our past Crescendo Award music winners, so how exciting to have her back. Also, there is more where that came from. The Tulsa Opera, which excels at producing these brilliant productions of the opera classics, is showing Madame Butterfly February 28th through March 1st at the Tulsa Performing Arts Center. And as Rotarians, Ken McConnell has arranged a special deal for you. You can get a 20% discount whenever you enter the promo code Rotary. And so, and also next week, Ken is donating 2 tickets that we'll be auctioning off. So be sure to get your tickets now, and thank you, Ken and company. We appreciate that. Also, thank you to this week's meeting sponsors, Arun Joshi and Joanna Smith with Hearts for Hearing, Sherry Fine and Chris Ambergy from Fine Airport Parking, Daniel Simone and Kevin McManus from PWC, brand new members and already getting in there and getting a sponsorship. We appreciate that. And Kevin Lewis and Ken Freeman with Lewis Roofing. Thank you to all of you sponsors. In upcoming programs, on February 26th, Mike Holder, OSU Athletic Director, and then on March 4th for an encore performance. We always love when CJ Box is with us, the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 27 novels, including the Joe Pickett series, will be our speaker that week. Also, tomorrow night, we have another Thirsty Thursday, which is so fun. Tomorrow will be at Charleston South from 5:30 to 7 p.m., so please be there. That's a fun time. And on April 1st, we have our annual Business Visitation Day. This is a time where you get to go around and see your fellow Rotarians, where they work, what they do, and just get to know a little bit more about your fellow Rotarians and what they have to offer. So it is a great time to do that. We still have some slots open for volunteers to host the lunch in their establishment. So there are forms on the table for you to fill out. And if you have any questions, please contact the committee chair, Barbara Kogerman. We now have a special side mic presentation from Katie Johnson and Ashley Cutshaw.
This month, we're celebrating 100 years since Oklahoma voted to ratify the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. It states the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Katie and I would like to take a few minutes to celebrate the role that Oklahoma played in ratifying the 19th Amendment. So you can see here, this is the state of Oklahoma. Will you go back just one? And this is our suffrage flag. It's got purple, white, and gold, which are the colors of the National Women's Party suffrage flag. And it indicates that Oklahoma is one of the original 36 states to ratify the 19th Amendment. Okay. So women's voting rights has been a hot topic since the beginning of our country. In a letter to her husband, John Adams, Abigail Adams encouraged him to protect the rights of women, stating, "If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound to any laws in which we have no voice or representation." So in the end, the choice of who could vote was left up to the states, and all states voted to revoke the right of women to vote. So then comes the Wild West. So in the Wild West, when the territories were developing their governments, they included rights for women. So 15 states allowed women to vote in 1919, and only 2 of them were east of the Mississippi. So the first was Wyoming. In 1869, a bill was signed into law allowing all female residents 21 years and older the right to vote. The territory was already progressive in other ways. The legislature had passed progressive measures guaranteeing women teachers the same pay as men and granting women landowning rights apart from their husbands. 2 decades later, when they were up for statehood, the one condition was that they repeal the women's vote. The legislator told Congress in a telegram, "We will remain out of the Union 100 years rather than come in without the women." Eventually, the condition was dropped, and Wyoming became a state in 1890, being the first state to allow women to vote. The same year, the suffrage movement emerged in the Oklahoma Territory. Several voting rights bills were introduced but failed. In 1907, the Oklahoma Territory became a state. At first, despite decades of organization, women were granted the right to vote in school elections only. November 5th, 1918, almost 2 years before the ratification of the 19th Amendment, Oklahoma passed a universal women's suffrage amendment to our state constitution. So Oklahoma and other early adopters were instrumental in passing ratifying the 19th Amendment. And so Katie's going to tell us some Oklahoma-specific stories.
Oh, we found a lot of Oklahoma stories and intrigue associated with women's suffrage, including land runs. Single women were allowed to participate in the land runs just as the men. 160 acres of homestead and a town lot in their own right. And since the land runs were after the Civil War, African American women also participated in the land runs. 28 of them successfully staked claims in the land opening of 1889. And then there was Annetta Daisy. Daisy showed up for the 1889 land run as a newspaper correspondent, and that's when she caught the land rush fever, riding on the cowcatcher of a slow-moving train, and she successfully staked her own claim, held her claim. Women had to do that, same as men, defended her claim against a man contester in a gun battle, and had a wound in her arm to prove it. And after she successfully settled all of her allowable allotments, she became part of the Sooner lore when she organized 11 women, armed them, hid them out in a ravine for their own protection until they could successfully stake claims that she helped them identify in advance of the land run. Now, the cavalry never found them, but they did capture Miss Daisy when she was coming back from El Reno on a supply run. So she learned her lesson, and the next time she waited till the starting gun, but 22 of those 36 women successfully staked their claims in that particular land run. This next slide, Phil Viles directed us to this one, and it is a statue in the Capitol Building Rotunda of 3 of the leaders of women's suffrage, Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Susan B. Anthony. Now, there's a question mark because there's an uncarved portion of this statue, and rumor has it that that's being held for the first woman president. Some would say, no, that is in honor of the myriad of people who supported women's suffrage. But either way, it's a great commemoration of pioneers for women's rights, past, present, and future. And in the very near future, this Saturday at 11 a.m., there's to be a march and rally at the Tulsa Historical Society and Museum. There'll be living history performances, and this will all be part of a 6-month kickoff for the celebration of the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. Might check that out.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie and Ashley and Michelle of our Diversity and Inclusion Committee for bringing that history to us. How interesting. I love that. Another day in history that we all know, during a speech in Montgomery, Alabama in 1957, a young Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. first described life's most persistent and urgent question as being, "What are you doing for others?" And then it was very evident that he lived out the next decade of his life to going about and answering that question for himself and the legacy that he created. I'm reading a book right now by Tom Rath, and it's titled Life's Great Question, Discover How You Contribute to the World. And in it, he urges the reader to move from the thought, the well-known thought of a lot of times, you are what you do. Don't we do that a lot? What do you do? What do you do? And that's kind of a conversation starter that we're used to. But he's asking us, instead of thinking you are what you do, change that thought to you are how you help. And according to Rath and other researchers, the defining features of a meaningful life, after many, many interviews, is connecting and contributing to something beyond the self. I found this true in my own life, as this week I'm reflecting on 4 years of being cancer-free. And 4 years ago this week, I went through an 8-hour surgery to have a double mastectomy to remove cancer that was just found through a routine screening at the age of 42, something you're not expecting. But the night before my surgery, I wasn't in imminent danger of death. They had caught it early. Everything was going to be okay. But I had one of those things that I would probably call, and some would probably call, the near-death experience. And so I was so nervous that night that about maybe possibly leaving my children, I have two kiddos, that I wrote a letter to them. And it was at that time that I had the ultimate realization of what was most important in my life. You see, in that letter, I didn't write about how to make money. You all know I love money. I'm in banking. I didn't write how to have a dream career. I'm also a leadership coach. You know, maybe that should have gotten in there somewhere. But none of those things were on my mind. I wrote about relationships. I wrote about their legacy. And I wrote about making their mark on the world in a positive way. And you know that I love Rotary, and you do too, because it allows us to answer that question that Dr. King posed so many years ago: what are you doing for others on a daily and weekly basis? So today, we are so honored to have two gentlemen with us today in our program who it's obvious they hold this creed for themselves. They will be joining me in a moment on stage, and I know you all know them, but I want to give a little bit of introduction so you can see a little bit into their background. Before his service in Congress, Senator James Lankford served students and families for more than 20 years in ministry, including 15 years as the Director of Student Ministry for the Baptist Convention of Oklahoma and Director of the Falls Creek Youth Camp, the largest youth camp in the United States with 51,000 students. He was recognized as the Senate's top-ranked taxpayer's friend by the National Taxpayers Union for his strong record in support of lower taxes, limited government, and economic freedom. He has also been recognized by many other organizations for his work toward increased personal freedom, economic growth, and religious liberty. Senator Lankford lives in Oklahoma City with his wife, Cindy. They have been married more than 27 years and have 2 daughters, Hannah and Jordan. Also joining us today is Senator Kevin Matthews. He attended Central State University in Edmond, Oklahoma, where he pledged Phi Beta Sigma. He later earned a degree in fire protection technology while serving 25 years on the Tulsa Fire Department. He retired in January 2010 as the Administrative Fire Chief, Chief of Personnel, of a 694-person fire department with budget responsibility of approximately $52 million. During his career as a chief officer, he completed the 4-year middle management curriculum at the National Fire Academy and the 5-year Executive Development Institute at Dillard University. Senator Matthews has owned a number of businesses, as well as multiple interests in real estate and wholesale retail ventures, most of which are located in the North Tulsa and Greenwood area. He is passionate about seeing the North Tulsa community as the prosperous and successful community it once was. Please help me welcome Senators Lankford and Matthews. I have to be honest with you all. Whenever the program committee came to me and asked me to moderate this program for us, I said, well, we really have 2 experts in the field in our club, and that would be, of course, Hannibal Johnson and Phil Armstrong. And they asked me to do this as president of the club, and I thought, you know, I hate that I don't know more about the race massacre and some of the things that we'll be talking about today. But then I thought, really, maybe that's a lot of Oklahomans and a lot of us in the room, as it wasn't taught in schools, at least in my school, and I'm just learning more about it in the recent years. So I'm really thankful to have you all here with us today, and from definitely a novice's perspective on what you can do to enlighten us on everything that you're working on. So Senator Matthews, I'll start with you. You're on the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission. How did this come about?
Well, first, Becky, I'd like to thank you for having us. I'd like to thank Hannibal and Phil for the great work they've done on the commission so far, as well as Chuck for getting this coordinated. And then I'd like to thank Senator Lankford for all of his assistance. How this happened was when I got elected. After I'd been elected a few years, there were people upset with me at the Greenwood Cultural Center. And I went down and I talked to them and said, why are you upset with me? They said, well, you've been a state representative. I started as a state representative. You've been there for a few years. And you haven't done anything for the Greenwood Cultural Center or this area down on Greenwood. And I said, well, what would you like to have done? And so I was able to talk to local philanthropists here in Tulsa, many of you may know, about helping me to coordinate an effort to address the things that needed to happen in the Greenwood area. And then we realized that the centennial was coming. And so in 2017, I passed Senate Bill 17, which allowed for us to have a somewhat of a bank account or a revolving fund at the History Center to create an opportunity for private-public funding to do something about turning that tragedy into triumph. And when I went with Senator Lankford to Washington, D.C., we saw that the National African American Museum of History and Culture was telling our story. And 5 million people had gone there in the first 2 years, and we weren't telling the story here. So we started the commission to address the issue.
What was your initial, Senator Matthews, what was your initial mission? What do you want to accomplish with the commission?
Well, initially, we were just going to fix some things at the Greenwood Cultural Center. They had the flame that wasn't working. They needed some modifications, and we started there. And my initial goal was to raise about, we started with $300,000, and then we just kept talking, and it grew to about $5 million. And then as we continued to move forward, we thought we can tell this in a greater way. And so we formed the commission. We continued to work with people across the United States. And now we have an opportunity to do a full history center, and that's where we are now.
Very good. And Senator Lankford, how did you get involved on the commission?
So in some ways, I backed into this. I was telling the story, and then I had folks reach out and say, you're telling the same story we're telling, why don't you just join us in this process to do it? Starting in about 2015, I started in almost every meeting I was in Tulsa, just raising the question, 6 years from now, the entire country is going to pause for 24 hours. Maybe it's just an hour, maybe it's 20 minutes. But the country's going to pause for a moment in 2021, and they're going to say, the largest race riot in American history happened 100 years ago today. And so I started asking in 2015, when that question's asked in 2021, how are we going to answer that as Tulsa? What are we going to say is different? And I used to talk about that all the time, and then I had folks reach out to me and say, come help us. Let's come work on this together. We're talking about some of the same issues. And we just started engaging and trying to find ways that we can help cooperate and work together. That's led me to be able to do multiple speeches on the floor of the U.S. Senate, to be able to tell the story there, to be able to work through what is it like to have a national recognition for that region, what can I do to be able to help in the museum and the cultural center and other areas, to be able to identify what we can do.
In regards to those speeches on the Senate floor, what inspired that?
You know what, I wish I could tell you what inspired them more than anything else. For me, I guess it was a story not being told. Racial unity has always been an issue for me. Literally, my whole life, this has been an issue for me. And the more I talked to people and the more I kept pointing out 6 years out, this is coming, then 5 years out, this is coming, the more I learned when I would start to say this is coming, people would say, what was it? And I was amazed at the number of people, like you had mentioned before, that never heard about that massacre that happened, that didn't have the background and the details on it, and so I just started telling the story. Now, it was an issue initially for Oklahoma, and so when I'm speaking on the floor at that point, I'm telling my colleagues about something, but also trying to be able to tell the nation as well about this. You know, we talked about in history, many of you know, in 1919, that summer of 1919, there were race riots all over the country. Washington, D.C., Chicago, Longview, I mean, they were all over the country. There were race riots as African-American soldiers were coming back from World War I, and they had been recognized as leaders and had led men and had great responsibility. Then they came back home and were told to take their place. And they were pushed out. And there was a pushback in multiple other communities around the country in 1919, but not so here, not until 1921.
On the story, in fact, would you mind just telling us a little bit about the background and the story that you were just saying that you had to tell, your fellow congressman the story? There may be people in the room today that don't know what we're talking about and haven't completely heard everything.
Yeah, so let me just give a short synopsis on this as well. So go back to 1921. In that time period, again, we'd watched the country burning around in multiple other places in 1919 as white workers were pushing African Americans out and saying, you're not welcome to be able to return back here. And we saw that in multiple pockets around the country. In 1921, in that time period in Tulsa, blacks, as they came through downtown Tulsa, couldn't go to the restroom anywhere. There were only certain places that black men or women could go to the restroom. So Dick Rowland, who's a young shoeshine boy, was working in downtown Tulsa, and there was one building he had to go to be able to go upstairs to be able to get to the one restroom. When he actually went up to the upstairs, got into the elevator, there was a young lady who was white that when got in the elevator door closed, there was a scream. Now there's lots of discussion about what the scream was. There was the running statement became that he stepped on her foot and that she screamed and they yelled. But when the elevator doors opened, he took off running, afraid for what was going to happen. They ended up collecting him later. They went and chased him down. By the way, later after that, she then came back later and said nothing happened in the elevator. But they accused him of all kinds of horrible things in the elevator, went down to Greenwood, got him, brought him in, put him into the jail. And at the time then, shortly after that, a group of white men started gathering around the jail and started saying, send him out to us. So a group of African-American men from Greenwood, who most of them were military veterans, they came down because this riot was forming around the jail here in Tulsa to come and basically help the sheriff and to say, if you need help protecting Dick Rowland, we're going to be here to be able to help protect. And they scuffled in the middle of the street, and the sheriff was saying, no, we don't need your help. And there was all the back and forth, and again, all the newspaper accounts are undetermined other than we know a gunshot went off. There was a scuffle over a rifle that one of the black men had, and it went off. At that point, the men ran back to Greenwood, and the white rioters then took off after them. What they at that time called Little Africa was their demeaning term that they used for the Greenwood district. That thriving business community, this was May the 31st of 1921, within hours, that evening, those white rioters had gone out to there and they had massacred up to 300 people. We don't have good numbers at this point, but we know they had burned thousands of homes, 1,200 businesses, 9,000 homes. They devastated the entire Greenwood area, set it on fire, and the sheriff, trying to be able to get additional help to be able to send up there, ended up deputizing people that were literally part of the riot. And they just watched homes burn and watched things be destroyed. Some of the most recognized, most prominent, bankers, community leaders, surgeons. Dr. Jackson was a nationally renowned surgeon in Greenwood. He was literally hands up walking down the street on there. Rioters came up and just shot him on the spot and left him for dead. It was a horrible, brutal experience where the community just devastated the Greenwood district and walked away. Add insult to injury on top of that, most all the insurance coverage for that area had an exclusion clause for riot. And so if the damage had been caused by a riot, you weren't covered by insurance. So a third of the community from Greenwood left. A third of the community we don't know. Many of those died, obviously. And a third of them stayed to be able to rebuild. The Red Cross came in. Several of the churches around this community, including this one, First Baptist Downtown, others, got engaged to be able to help Greenwood. And you saw the Red Cross especially set up temporary homes, temporary tents, and people lived on the burned out ashes of their old homes. And the Red Cross stayed for months and months and months and helped them get restarted again as a community. But we know the decades of devastation that came from that. It was a moment that much of Tulsa did not talk about for decades. And it was an interesting thing when you talk about no one had heard of it. There was a very long time period that everyone just kind of ignored it. Yes, that occurred. Let's not talk about it. We're now as a community in the past couple of decades, really, let's say 15 years or so, been a renewal to be able to say, let's pick up this piece of our history and to say, what have we learned from this and where do we go from here? And to be able to recognize not only did riots happen in Chicago and in D.C. and other places in 1919, it was here at home for us. In fact, it was the worst. And so where do we go from here on it? That's the very short version.
Yeah, thank you. Senator Matthews, why do you think it's important to tell that story?
Well, first, it's important to know your history because it has something to do with the DNA of your city. And when we try to have this be a dirty secret that we hide, it affects us continuously, just like any other wound. And until it's talked about, it's brought out into the open air, and we look at it and we're transparent about it, we can't heal and move forward. And so it's just the opposite. People think, or the prevailing thought was, don't talk about it and it'll be forgotten. There's a lot of resentment in my community for not being able to have insurance claims paid and having to rebuild, and then it being torn down again, or the city divided again by urban renewal after that, and then continually acting as if the things that caused terrible wounds in my community didn't exist. And so one of the things that I like people to understand is I love Oklahoma, but here we had 168 people die, and we have a national memorial to the Oklahoma City bombing. And here, with 300 plus people, we can't even find a tombstone for black people. And that's a wound that needs to heal, because we have to look at the truth, and we need to turn that tragedy into triumph by looking at it. The great things that happened in Greenwood, this tragedy, and then where we can go from there.
Yeah, can I make just a quick comment on what Kevin was saying on that as well? Kevin, ending with the great things that happened in Greenwood, we lose track of the fact this was a very prosperous community. Greenwood was nationally recognized, and of course Oklahoma had a lot of black communities that were here, Boley and Greenwood and Langston and Clearview, and there were other black towns that were here. And a lot of people had left other areas of the South to be able to come here and get a fresh start, to be able to be here in this community. And there were thriving business leaders and medical leaders and everything else. And so part of the challenge of telling the story of Greenwood is Greenwood's story is not a one-day story. It had an exceptionally tragic day that had a lot that led up to it, and there's a lot after that that needs to be told. But the power of the Greenwood story is the power of so many great leaders that were there, and that entrepreneurial spirit that was there, that we can't recognize one event and miss all the families and all the individual stories that are in it as well, like Dr. Jackson that I'd mentioned before.
Did you have something else?
Well, I just want to say, you know, what happened with Dick Rowland was just, it was just the keg finally being lit. The tension was the fact that we had such a prosperous black community, and the envy of that is what we believe was really what this was all about. It's a shame that we can see that on Standpipe Hill, we were told that cannons were shot into a church. It's one of the few massacres of Americans upon Americans where incendiary bombs were dropped on Americans from other Americans. And so that's a wound that needs to be healed. But I think what we're trying to do with the History Center and all of what we're doing is trying to have young people, old people, and all people have a dialogue about what happened and how we can keep that from happening today. And as you said earlier, it's about building relationships, and that's what we're trying to do with this History Center.
You mentioned tension, and in the United States right now, there's a lot of tension around a lot of different topics. But I see you two working together, and Senator Lankford, you're a Republican U.S. Senator, white man. Senator Matthews, a Democrat, black man, Oklahoma Senator. What does this say, your relationship about working with this, on this history together, about bipartisanship, about equity, about equality, about inclusion?
Well, I'll just say that the reason I have a great deal of respect for U.S. Senator Lankford is because, you know, each time we speak, we talk about we have some major differences in some policies, but when you know, we can't be in the Bible Belt and whip people with the belt. We have to treat people like we say we would treat them, and he treats me like a good Christian brother, where that those things that we disagree on we can talk about, but the things that we agree on, like the humanity of this story and how we need to heal around it, we can agree on. And our relationship is around us having respect for one another, and when we disagree, we do it respectfully, and we don't focus on that for a long time, because I understand he stands where he stands on certain issues, and I respect that, and I feel he does the same thing, and I think that Washington could learn from that.
I'd like to pose this to both of you. What can each of us do to bridge the racial divide here in the Tulsa community?
Can I start that one? Kevin, thank you. Those are kind words. And for our friendship, and you're right, there are some areas where clearly you're wrong, we disagree on, so. Clearly. So we can be friends and to be able to talk through things and to be able to say areas of disagreement, and that'd be okay. That model, I think, is something that's important to all of us in our conversation. I started several years ago just saying to Oklahoma families, and we've talked about this before here in this meeting even before, I started just privately going to individuals and saying, has your family ever invited a family of another race to your home for dinner? Now, that's not earth-shattering, but it's amazing to me how many people I've asked that question to all over the state of all races, that when I say, has your family ever invited a family of another race to your home for dinner, they respond back to me, I have friends of another race. To which I say, that's not what I asked. Right. Has your family ever invited a family of another race to come to your home for a meal? Now, I call it Sunday Solutions. You can do it any day you want to. But Sundays are typically a little bit slower days for most Americans, but lunch or dinner, just invite another family over and to just come visit and just to talk. Now, what's interesting is how many times I've brought that up to people, that once we get past the initial I have friends of another race conversation, the next thing they'll quietly say is, I don't know who I would invite. And I would say, okay, we've identified the first problem. You're friendly with some of another race, you're not friends with anyone of another race. Because if you were, you would say, I'm going to invite these folks over. I'm friends with all. I don't know why I haven't invited them over before. There's a barrier in that. I think the race issue is not something either one of us can lead a piece of legislation and to vote it out. Race relations begins first in a family, and it's a family legacy that you only break when the kids watch the parents and they see this is normal dialogue. Now, I would say this to us, we've come a long way as Americans, but we still have a long way to go. Most countries around the world don't even try to do race relations. Don't even try. And I can prove that pretty simply. You watch the Olympics coming up, you watch all the flags march in and see what the athletes look like. From most countries, the athletes all look identical when they're walking in. All of the same look, all the same background. There are very few countries where you'll see diversity among their athletes. That's not because we're the only country in the world that actually has diversity. There are lots of countries in the world that have diversity. Most countries aren't even trying what we're trying. We still can lead the world in engaging in race relations if we'll finish what God has started in our country. But we've got a lot to finish on it.
Would you like to respond to that one?
Yes, I think that, when I talk to people, before I was the administrative fire chief, I was the EEO recruitment officer for the fire department, and I taught diversity. And I always try to tell people the worst thing about you is also can be the best thing about you. The best thing about you taken too far can be the worst thing about you. And for us to have one of the worst tragedies here in American history, the best thing is that we can be the beacon for reconciliation and race relations if we take a page from what we're talking about today. And what I've taught my children and the way that I live my life and the way that I was able to be effective as one of the very few African Americans on the fire department to move forward and create an atmosphere where now we have the first 2 women chief officers, 3 more new black chief officers for the first time in many years. It is about building relationships and just dialoguing and just sitting down, whether it's, Chuck Wilson and I are very close over me being one of the people that helped to start the North Tulsa Rotary Club, and they were coming over having lunch with us every week and just try to find common ground. And that's the central focus of building better relations, because race relations is only human relations. And if we take the time to get to know more people, I think that we can accomplish a lot more. And that's what I think that the senator and I are trying to do.
What can we do individually and then also collectively as the Rotary Club of Tulsa to help commemorate the centennial next year for the race massacre?
Let me take a stab at a couple of those. Number one is learn the facts and the details on it. Just get some background, because you're going to bump into people and they're going to hear news about this, and they're going to be around people at work that they're going to say, I don't even know what they're talking about. So if you learn the facts, you can be the smartest kid at the water cooler at that moment, and to be able to help folks know, okay, here are the details on that. I actually sat down with Hannibal. I was looking around before. Is Hannibal here? There you are. Okay, talking about this piece of history with Hannibal in the room is like preaching a sermon with Billy Graham in the room, okay?
I feel the same way.
It's a little intimidating to be able to do, because I don't know few people on the planet that has researched this more and knows more history. He's forgotten more than I know on this, okay? I sat down with Hannibal several months ago. We sat down in the front pew of Vernon AME, and I just interviewed him to be able to pull out the facts and the issues on this, and we videoed that. And Cox is actually going to run that starting next week as a 30-minute special on that. We just posted that on our YouTube page. Hannibal, did you know that we posted that out today? So it just went public today. But we posted that out as just a 30-minute interview to be able to talk through what happened and to be able to get some general context on the whole thing. And so if you want to be able to see that and to learn more of the facts and the details about that, get that from the horse's mouth over there, and getting a chance to be able to watch the YouTube that we have out there on our channel and that Cox is going to have statewide starting next week. But learn some of the facts and information so you can be a part of the solution of telling the story, but also go deeper, developing those relationships. We should be individuals that lead this. Everybody in here is a community leader. This whole thing about we should have a community dialogue, some people think is like a group of politicians around a table with cameras having a community dialogue. That's not community dialogues. They happen around kitchen tables. They happen around dining room tables. They happen in real family situations. So everybody in this room should be leading the way in developing relationships and identifying issues in your own workplace where there may be racial bias, in the people that you are around, the people at your church, the people in your own community and neighborhood, and your own friendships. And for heaven's sake, make sure your children don't assume where you are in relationships. Show them. Kids learn, grandkids learn by seeing more than hearing. We should demonstrate to them what that looks like to be able to work together as friends.
Excellent. Do you have anything to add on what we might do?
Well, Hannibal will tell it on me if I don't say. You can go to www.tulsa2021.org and learn more about this. We'll be talking later today about the curriculum that's available. But someone texted me the other day and asked me if I knew about the power of 10. And I asked what they meant. And they said, if you just make an impact on 10 people, that make an impact on 10 people, that make an impact on 10 people, it will make a difference. And so each one teach one is what we should be about. And the other ways that you can help is in your organizations or in your businesses when you have an opportunity. You know Hannibal, you know Phil, you now have met myself, and we have a whole commission that has an opportunity when you have a program or a speaking engagement for people to learn about this. And then I'll just give a plug for all of Hannibal's books as well. Those are ways that you can learn about it and ways that you can make other people know about it.
Definitely. I want to leave just a couple of minutes for questions here. So, but do you have anything, either of you, that you would like to, final thoughts?
No, I'd love to jump into questions if anybody has any. So.
Okay. Do we have any questions?
Can you talk about the project that you have planned for Greenwood, what the community can expect?
Well, she said the project that we have planned for Greenwood, and that project is led by local project architects, and it's a history center that allows people to experience what happened. In that history center, a person, when they first walk in, would be able to step across the railroad tracks, just like we've done in our city, dividing black people from white people. We have the opportunity to go through all the different parts of the heyday of Black Wall Street and the prosperity, then what happened, and then we'll have a space that you can actually dialogue and download and talk about what you've experienced. That's just a small, brief description of what we're planning.
Yeah, and one more thing I'd add to that as well is the Greenwood in the 1921 and the focus on this is not about a museum or a location. It's about a region. Tulsa for too long has said the words North Tulsa and had its own meaning behind it. There's some really great folks in North Tulsa. There's some great business opportunities in North Tulsa. North Tulsa is Tulsa. And so the one thing I would encourage business leaders to be able to do, well, we just saw QT just opening up a new QT in the area. Well, we're watching the renovation of the Big Ten ballroom slowly coming back up to speed and get renovated again. There's open land. There's opportunities for business development. The Brady district is literally blocks away from Greenwood, but you cross from Brady into Greenwood and you watch this dramatic shift that happens in 150 feet. And so I encourage business leaders that are looking to expand business, open business, engage. There's some great areas to be able to engage right there. And so part of the dream of Greenwood is not just seeing a museum, though that's a very important part. And we believe for cultural tourism and for folks to be able to come through, to be able to walk through, it's vital. But it's also the redevelopment of an area that sat idle for a very long time without purpose.
Paul?
There is an effort underway and has been for a while to try to figure out the right designation it's a little different because it's a region, and quite frankly, everybody you talk to in Greenwood has a little different idea of what they'd like to see as far as that designation. Ronald Reagan had a famous quote that he said, when you get in bed with the federal government, you're going to get more than a good night's sleep. So here's our challenge. Here's our challenge, just trying to figure this out. A lot of those federal designations come with a lot of strings attached to them. Like you can't do certain building, you've got to have certain protections, you can't change, you can't alter, you can't update. And so we think we've narrowed down to the right designation to try to figure out how we can allow Greenwood to thrive as a business community, because I believe, and I think we believe, that one of the best ways to be able to honor the legacy of Greenwood is let it thrive again. I mean, it was a thriving business community. You let it thrive again. If there's some designation that we put on it that doesn't allow it to thrive again, that's a disservice to that community. And so that's one thing we're trying to be able to fix on. Let me give you an example. When the Oklahoma City Memorial was opened up, the museum is actually not a federal designation. Where the chairs sit is a federal designation. And the reason for that is they were required to also get a snowmobile and have that on site if it had a federal designation, because that was a federal requirement. Have its own fire truck. Now, this is a 3-acre plot of land. This is all the federal requirements that went with it to be able to do that. So instead, they just said, tell you what, no. We're going to have this part be federal and this part not be federal. So there is a greater challenge to be able to walk through on that. But we're really close on trying to get it the right designation so we're not limiting Greenwood's future growth. Yeah.
We also, our team has met with Senator Lankford's office as well to address the fact that Senator Lankford appointed Hannibal Johnson to the 400 Years of African American Commission. And through that effort, we've been able to go to Washington, D.C. and work towards us meaning the state of Oklahoma, joining the National Civil Rights Trail. And so we're wanting to work towards the correct designation, the correct type of things that need to make us be eligible for that. And so I've also convened the mayors of the 13 original black towns, because you may or may not know that Mayor Holt tried to upstage us when we were raising $20 million private dollars. They're building the Clara Luper Center with public dollars, $18 million to do the Clara Luper History Center in Oklahoma City, and $7 million of operating funds, all public money. And so we are trying to connect, or my goal is for us to connect the 13 original black towns from Tulsa to there and join the National Civil Rights Trail. And Senator Lankford's office is helping us with that, as well as the Lieutenant Governor.
You know, we don't have a lot of opportunity to see people from different backgrounds and, Democrat, Republican, so forth, working together on a project. But, there was also kind of jokingly discussion about differences and disagreements, and, nobody agrees on everything. But maybe a little bit of insight on how working together might have influenced your thinking on things that maybe you had different opinions on, and learning and growing on your thoughts in some of those areas. Not necessarily specific, but just general.
Well, for me, being a Democrat, one of the problems that we had with the Greenwood Cultural Center is Senator Maxine Horner and Representative Don Ross created that, did a great job. It was been a sense of pride for our community, but it was funded by the state of Oklahoma. And there's many people asking our state legislators, why can't you make that happen again? Why can't you make that happen again? And the reality for me, being in this conservative environment, not only in the training that I've gone to, but in my interactions with Republicans in the conservative environment, I've learned that that day is gone for a while. We have to have public-private partnerships. We have to create opportunities to have for-profits inside of nonprofits. We have to have other ways to fund things if we're going to be effective today. And so, for example, 15 years ago, we would have asked for the funding for Greenwood to be for the next 15 years. But now we're asking for a seed funding and the opportunity to create an opportunity to create a fund that the interest would then pay forward rather than to have public funding continuously. And so that's something I've learned through these relationships because of the reality of being one of only 9 Democrats in a Senate of 48 people in the state. I'm realizing that that's the environment I'm in, and so I act accordingly, and I think I've been fairly effective.
And Kevin and I don't work on a lot of the same issues all the time because he's working on state issues, I'm working on federal issues. But we both have a passion for this project, and we both got a different direction. There aren't federal earmarks anymore. Those are long gone. He talked about some of the changes that have happened in state government and the way that we fund a lot of projects. That's certainly happened in the federal government. That it's not just, okay, write in an earmark real quick and get those dollars. That doesn't happen, and with $1 trillion in deficit, it shouldn't happen. But there are ways that we've got to be able to cooperate together for the things that are important to us and how we're going to get it accomplished. There's this very real sense that he and I both have. People are created in the image of God. They have value and worth. And you're going to disagree on something. My wife and I have discussions on where we're going to go eat after church on Sundays. Okay, we'll pick 2 different places and have to be able to work that out. That shouldn't be that radical of a concept for 2 different people to be able to say, we're not going to agree on everything, but we should be able to sit down and be able to respect each other enough to be able to work it out and try to figure this out because we both want the same thing. I found with most people I interact with, even the people that are screaming at me on social media, if we actually sit down and talk, 85% of the things we agree on. And it gets pretty noisy on 15, but a soft answer really does turn away wrath. And if we'll actually engage and try to figure it out, most of the time we can figure it out.
I'll just make a joke like Senator Lankford did earlier. He continues to get me to look at designations that cost less, and I continue to say, give us the money. But we still keep talking.
On that note, thank you, Senator Lankford and Senator Matthews. We appreciate your work and your time with us today. Well, Rotarians, we have our work cut out for us, as always. And just continuing in the question that Dr. Martin Luther King said, how will you serve others? How will you help others? As you know, you are agents of change. Now go change the world.